What usually follows that noise is a scream of pure joy. Sometimes a cry for mercy, or I think, even though I never haven't played it, yelling Yahtzee would be fun once or twice, right? A boy can dream. These dice on any given day or even hour can represent vastly different moments in the lives of someone. I'm referring to fictional lives of game pieces, but this is the world of tabletop games. And when you're sitting well into your second hour of Betrayal of House on the Hill, you tell me if it doesn't feel like real life. These may be fictional games, but the emotions are very much real. That's the power these games can hold over people, and hopefully from my tone of voice and my example, I've convinced you that I'm one of those people. The games that fit into this tabletop games category don't specifically refer to those half-finished games of Monopoly with our families that we remember fondly, I swear. Although those factor into these, but I'm referring to a far more passionately driven hobby niche. Look, all of this simply put as tabletop games are a big deal. I mean, Gen Con, a national tabletop convention, brought in a crowd of 90,000 people in 2019. That's enough to sell out the largest Premier Football League stadium, Old Trafford, and you still have a good 15,000 or so people that love tabletop games. Now, if you don't believe me, there is a wonderful NPR article titled "A Look into the Wild Economy of Tabletop Board Game Funding," written by Christiana Silva, where she talks about a sequel to a popular tabletop board game called Gloomhaven, but the sequel was titled Frosthaven. The interesting thing about this is that it used the crowdfunding platform Kickstarter to fund its creation, and it simply had a goal of $500,000 to cover the production and creation fees. But within mere hours, the game was fully funded and overshot its entire goal, and it now stands as the most funded board game on the site ever, with a near $13 million pledged towards the single board game. And furthermore, out of all the 487,035 projects that have ever been funded on Kickstarter, it ranks third of all time. This is behind a unique Pebble Time smartwatch and a very high-tech, high-end cooler. So I guess that this board game sits among elite company. Look, I'm having a bit of a humorous tone, a little jab at it. Just simply put, the point here is the amount of money being flooded into this industry through a online website. This isn't even to mention the monopolies we mentioned earlier. Not the monopolies of board games, but the Monopoly board game. This is tough. Simply put, that those games bring in millions of dollars. These games also bring in millions of dollars, but these are called hobbyist games. They're a smaller market. This is the small market, $13 million. Anyways, back to the main article. Board games in total on the site have produced $176 million in 2019. And according to the NPR article, which cites Kickstarter data gathered by an entertainment site Polygon, that is a 6.8% increase over the previous year. Again, if you want to know more about this, definitely check out Christiana Silva's NPR article on the subject. This is all just to say that tabletop games are a big deal. So I hope I still have you listening, because I think now we can properly introduce the show. Hello, and welcome to the World Wide Hodge Pod, where we're figuring out the entire recipe that is humanity right now. This is the first episode, and the introduction will probably be far longer than any other episodes, because my hope is that I can link people back to this section when they're unfamiliar with the show. Generally speaking, this show is not going to be scripted. My opening remarks currently are pre-written. It's to give a flavor of what's to come and maintain a certain level of precision, and hope that I can present what I need to say. But hopefully this podcast will sit as a living and growing experience that will shed light to a myriad of stories. To properly explain what the show is about, I'm going to link back to talking about tabletop board games for a second. But the interesting part is that it so could easily be anything else, and that's kind of the point. Tabletop board games are a part of my life now. It's a meaningful hobby, and like all meaningful hobbies, and it's not a defining trait of mine. I enjoy it immensely, and I picked up this hobby when I moved to the United States of America. But the reason that this sticks out to me is that I wasn't shown this hobby by someone from the United States. Furthermore, the first game I played was about a small platoon of French soldiers in World War I. The French connection was unrelated to the person. All of this, I felt that I didn't have much to do with, right? French history wasn't something I had ever encountered, nor were board games something that were part of my life. All that stood for me was that there was an utterly fascinating worldwide connection that occurred during that moment, and I wasn't even looking for it. And it got me thinking, how much of my life is a collection of various touches with the world around me? And furthermore, how much of the world is a various connection with the world itself? I mean, once this thought started percolating in my head, well, from then on, it was full steam ahead with making every type of connection. Because you see, everything is connected in some wild and wacky way. Not definitively or with a sense of finality, but just hold on to that idea that we are all one giant hodgepodge of a global society. This is ultimately to say that this is an exploration together, piecing together different anecdotes and opening up a conversation to let ourselves grow. That's what this podcast is. So it's not going to be a history lesson tracing back to the origin of chess. It's Indian, by the way. Or we're not even going to get super left field and give you a history of checkers. Well, that's from Iraq. World Wide Hodge Pod is a story of now. Back then, right there, over there, somewhere there, even further away. Look, it's every little bit as it comes together. This is because I've come to think that life is a funny predicament of circumstance. The world ebbs and flows through each other, and the little bits we take for granted to be in our space, exclusive to us, where it can't even seem that someone else is involved, well, it easily proves universal with a little digging. This show felt extremely important to start because sharing the stories of the world as it is and is being and is coming together, well, hopefully it won't only just share knowledge, but it will share a smile and create that sense of community that is global. I'm really glad that you're listening because it means that this conversation can finally happen. Then it is in my final words of this introduction to talk a little bit about the matter of pre-written work. These opening remarks, as I stated earlier, have been premeditated and scripted, and I'm reading right now with a slight ad-lib here or there. However, the main content of the story, the episode, is not a written piece. It's a conversation starter, meaning I will research and present and talk with whoever is listening, but I won't be putting the stamp of finality on the subject. I am a person with one perspective. My words are not the narrative that should prevail. Simply, I want to bring forward what I find. Take what you hear and pass it on, or talk back to me. I'll explain how you can do that later. This show came to me because I don't want to stay silent on issues any longer. I'm not going to shy away from talking about contemporary events when it is appropriate, or touching on difficult subject matter when it comes up. However, I am making the firm decision to approach the topic with seriousness and respect, and that has informed a lot of the decisions of how this show is made. I debated early on to make the first episode about the board game Pandemic. It's a tabletop game in which you and 3 other players play roles as various social workers racing to cure a deadly pathogen. I thought that it would be a smart and well done story to draw parallels to what's happening in our current situation. However, as of August 11th at 9:50 a.m. Eastern Central Time, COVID-19 has infected 20,124,437 people around the world, and it's taken the lives of 737,224 people from this beautiful planet. That's according to Johns Hopkins. In these dark and troubling times, the hardships of many cannot be simplified to a story, to a narrative, to a simplification. My perspective is one of many, but the importance is that all our voices should be heard and given proper respect. This means to me that no matter what story is being told, it doesn't define who's being talked about. It simply is the circumstances that I found through my research. Life isn't clean. It doesn't have its narrative pauses and stops. It simply is being and happening. And that brings us to what this podcast stands as. The world is a hodgepodge, an ever-evolving recipe of various bits and pieces. It's constantly being. And by coming to understand that, I hope we can build a place where we can promote comfort and compassion and shine a positive light for the world. This isn't a show about contemporary events, although those will obviously influence it. It isn't a history lesson, but history will influence the show. This is a show looking at the contemporary moment as one funny predicament of circumstances on a global level. It's all a dice roll sometimes, but more than anything, it's a story worth listening to. Okay, so let's do this finally. Let's get the show started. So the music's cut. It's just my voice. So that's quite intimidating already and kind of intimate. Anyways, jokes aside, let's start this conversation. And I think with any time that a conversation begins, well, you got to introduce yourself, right? You got to say, hey, my name is Alexander Ronning, but my friends call me Sasha. That's due to a fact that I am half American and half Russian. Although my fascination with Sasha isn't due to cultural norms. I mean, when people ask me, sometimes I do tell them that it's a nickname for the name Alexander in Russian. But my, preference of the name Sasha stems from a simple preference. I just like the name. I think it's something I've always been called, and so it's always felt a bit more like me. It feels softer, more playful, I guess, is how I describe it. So that's a little bit about me and my name. And, I brought up the fact of my dual heritage, my Russian passport and my American passport. And it's already an interesting thing to think about there. I don't want to get too much into my personal life. It's not about me, but yeah, I think about it sometimes how my parents I shouldn't say shouldn't, but how my parents grew up, in the late stages of the Cold War. And of course, it's up for debate when it ended, but, around the 80s to early 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union, these people met each other through that. Worldwide, a connection. So that brings me. I'm a younger individual. I think that might come through my voice and some of the perspectives I hold, maybe in some of my nervousness, but I don't want to disclose any more of my personal information, internet safety reasons. I bring all of this up because I think that's where the conversation starts. But of course, you're now thinking, well, how do I contact you back, right? It's not like I can individually call every single one of you every weekend, although that would be pretty cool, but not practical in the slightest. And now that I think about it, no. But one of the things I thought to start off with here was to make a social media presence. Although I am younger, I have never quite felt comfortable with social media and what it really can do. I mean, I'm a private person, funny enough to do this, but I don't like to disclose information about me. I don't like to put myself out there all the time. So I've never grown comfortable with social media, but now I think of it as a sort of platform for connecting people, for promoting conversation, and if done right with a positive mindset and a willingness to try, I think there's something that can be cultivated there that couldn't exist in a time past and could be utterly unique to the moment. So with that said, I do run the World Hodge Pod Twitter and Instagram account, and you can find both at the handle at world_hodge_pod. So just again, that's the word World Hodge Pod with underscores in between World, Hodge, and Pod. That way you can follow us, and if you don't feel like following, I'm not going to be offended at all. Just feel free to tweet at us, respond, retweet, just engage in the conversation somehow. I'm hoping after this podcast airs or during the course of talking and debating, I can pose a few questions, which will be in the form of tweets, and that way people can respond back to them. And I also want to keep it open as a place where if I'm wrong, I want people to feel comfortable letting me know. I feel that the only way to get better is to make mistakes and to have people who can tell you that you made those. So that's really where the Twitter and the Instagram comes into. It's the conversation creator, the way that we can communicate with one another. And I am very hopeful for what that can eventually accomplish. So with that being said, I mean, what's more there to do other than start it? And I keep saying that I'm starting it, but a lot of this comes from the idea that there is a lot of newness, a lot of things I'm figuring out, and a lot of things that might not work. So again, stringing that back to the idea of a conversation, if there are things that just suck, oh my God, please tell me. I would hate to keep doing this and people just find me annoying. Of course, maybe for other reasons, but I'll figure those out in my other facets of life. Anyways, this should have come as a proclaimer before, but if you're not into tabletop games, or you don't like, or you've never come across tabletop games, or just in general, this topic already doesn't seem like a good fit, well then I am so sorry, but please stick around. I swear it's gonna be okay. The main reason being is that this is only sort of the theme of the month, is I guess, for lack of a better term, topic of the month, just a broad category as a sort of catalyst to push my own research. So what that means is that every month, I'm hoping I can switch out the theme or the topic and create a new framework from which I can then go ahead and research. So the way that this looks is, if we get a topic every month, maybe next month it's something as broad as food, it pushes me to research into topics such as food export and how that connects us. And like I said, this is less about how national dishes represent the country. It's more of our global situation and the interesting stories that can come out of that. And so this month of August, it's going to be tabletop games and kind of what their place in our world is, because a lot of people sit down to play all sorts of tabletop board games, right? I grew up once playing Chutes and Ladders, and my little brother, he loved Candyland, right? We have those little experiences, and now that I'm older, I am into a lot of other different games, and so are a lot of people. And I hope that intro kind of convinced you of that these are something that actually really exists in the world, for lack of better terms. So that means that every month, please, again, come back to that Twitter, that Instagram. Completely forgot to tell what that Instagram was going to be about. But anyways, the Twitter will sometimes put out polls so that I hope that the topics interest the people who are listening. And again, it's that idea of the conversation, that if you find something interesting, feel free to prod me into talking about things that are interesting to you and place your vote out there. So I'll send polls monthly through Twitter, probably around the last week or so. That way people can respond to them and say some certain topics that they would find interesting to frame our whole discussion around. And of course, the word discussion is kind of loose, but again, as long as I'm saying these things, I'm hoping that it pushes us in the right direction. And that's why the intro has gone on far too long, but also the right amount of time. I feel comfortable with having said what I've said, but again, on my final notes of this is the idea that I realize that this can be seen as a rather glorified position to talk for the world, right? On behalf of other people, on anything. That's why I wanted to make clear that I'm just a perspective, that setting these ground rules and really what this is aiming for will help constantly inform the decisions that are made and the certain things that are talked about. So this will probably sit for a while and it will inform. And that's why I don't want to talk about a cultural dish, because the story feels there. I mean, we can always search it up, but if I can then tie that into something even more interesting, well, then that's kind of where this sits. And people can then come in and say, well, you got that wrong, or have you ever considered this, or I found this interesting. And that's the way that this begins. And so tabletop games aren't necessarily a better or worse subject than any other subject. It was just the decision that I made to get myself started, because I figured if I never start this, if I'm always brainstorming and constantly reiterating, at a certain point, I'm just never going to start. So with that all being said, all being tied up, all being understood, I think we can finally travel. Hi, this is me during post-production, and you've probably already noticed that we didn't quite get to the story. The story actually exists on its own proper episode 1. This was a decision I made post-production, and I think it serves for the better. This may be actually something we continue to do as a sort of, when we switch topics, just a reminder of what this is and how we're feeling about the conversation, and a sort of touch base. So right now, this is seeming to be a primer of sorts. So we didn't get to the full story, but if you're curious about how a board game company based in Germany can teach us about educational reform, well, go ahead and already go to that first episode. And if you already came back from it to this episode and listened to the primer, well, I thank you immensely. But if you are listening to this through to the end and you are hearing this, you are the person that I desperately want to reach and cultivate and grow. So I cannot say my thank yous enough. Now I'm going to kick it to the outro soon, but just had to step in and say my piece. Thank you. And I hope you enjoyed what you heard. And I hope we're relatively on the same page now, because I think that's where the conversation starts. If you know where I'm coming from, well, then at least we can begin to understand each other and move forward. So again, thank you. And let's get some drums in here. All right. Wow. So maybe if I had to recap what this episode was about, it's the promise of learning and growing. You know who I am now. It's now my time to meet everybody else. And I hope that through this all, we can cultivate something fantastic and strong. I mean, okay. If you haven't already, please tweet at us. Go ahead and follow. If following doesn't seem like something you want to do, I'm not going to be offended at all. I think I've said that already in another episode, so you'll hear this a lot. I'm not going to be offended. I'm just trying to start a conversation, and if I can promote you and show you to the tools that I have at my disposal to start this conversation, well, help me use them, come back to me, and we can figure this out. Otherwise, if you feel that tweeting is putting yourself out there, take it on your own terms. When you feel ready to, go ahead and tweet. Otherwise, feel free to go to wherever you listen to your podcast, give us a rating. This will not only help the show, it's also going to be a way to converse. If you can tell me that the show is bad, well, then that's something I can course correct, and we can continue to form the conversation. Conversation doesn't happen in only one way. And if you are curious what that Instagram is about, I do tell you in episode 1. So there's an incentive already to go ahead and listen to about Ravensburger in Germany, that board game company I was talking about. Otherwise, I'm rambling for far too long. You got the gist. You know what's up. If I had to give credit, well, music and sound effects are provided through a mixture of Mixkit. The opening that you hear is from Mixkit, and the sound effects tend to come from Apple Loops. The recording process is done by me, and production is done by me. It's a one-man operation. But as long as people are engaging in the conversation, then it's all of us putting this together. Again, ramble too long. Thank you so much for joining us, listening through, and I hope to catch you on another episode. So until then, I'll see you later.